This is the CBS Evening News. Susan Spencer reporting. Good evening. Soviet citizens went to the polls this Easter Sunday and for the first time in over 70 years found more than one name on the ballot. A move toward democracy ordered by Mikhail Gorbachev. Barry Peterson reports how people responded to an election that actually may have mattered.
Democracy, Soviet style, dawned on a cold, steel gray day. A day for this country's 190 million voters to pick delegates to a newly created Council of Deputies. Some seats are contested by up to 12 candidates. The idea of having a choice of candidates is alien to most Soviets, but they seem pleased and in some cases downright anxious to give it a try. Said this man, "We've waited a long time." As Mikhail Gorbachev voted for candidates in his district this morning, he praised the election he ordered, even though some candidates have been taking swipes at him. It's good, he said. Why should someone be beyond criticism? And among the critical candidates is former protege Boris Yeltsin, ousted from the Politburo a year ago for his attacks on conservatives. He is poised for a dramatic political comeback in his race for a Moscow seat against the head of the state limousine factory. Are you enjoying this, he was asked? No, you can't call this pleasant, like a ballet or going to a movie. Outside, he was the combative populist who has electrified voters throughout the country. If he wins, he said, he will push for direct elections for all this country's leaders, from bottom to top, including the head of state. And he seems ready to sweep to office in a landslide. One indication, a random unscientific sampling of voters showed Yeltsin a walkaway, getting roughly 80 to 90% of the vote. The Soviets have no sophisticated election system with the ability to project instant winners and losers. They haven't needed one. So the results will be known the old-fashioned way, one ballot at a time. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Moscow.
The United States is ready to do an about-face on trade with Moscow, dropping some of the sanctions imposed when the Soviets invaded Afghanistan. State Department correspondent Bill Plant reports.
Tough trade restrictions slapped on the Soviet Union after its invasion of Afghanistan are about to be relaxed. The U.S. and its allied trading partners are expected to ease many of the sanctions on selling technology to the Soviets, sanctions imposed almost a decade ago. The U.S. reaction to the Soviet invasion, both political and economic, included boycotting the 1980 Olympics in Moscow and forbidding the sale to the Soviets of virtually all Western technology. Now, according to administration officials, this so-called no-exceptions trade policy is likely to be scrapped in favor of a case-by-case review of Moscow's high-tech shopping list. What could the West sell? Some computers, nothing too sophisticated, and basic automation systems. Probably oil exploration technology and simple telecommunications equipment. Still certain to be banned, sophisticated electronics, supercomputers, robotic assembly lines, semiconductor manufacturing. Anything, in other words, that represents a quantum jump in technology. A staunch critic and former Pentagon official says it's simply not possible to open the door just a crack.
There will be a flood of advanced technology going to the Soviet Union, no matter what administration officials now think. And any official who tells you that we can administer this thing so carefully that our national security is not going to be injured probably hasn't been in office very long.
Many still at the Pentagon will bolster that argument. But unless the president changes his thinking, it's a done deal. Not because it improves the balance of trade, in fact, there isn't much money involved, but because it sends a political signal to Moscow that the Bush administration considers itself practical but cautious. Bill Plant, CBS News, the State Department.
National Security Advisor Brent Scowcroft today denied a report that the U.S. has identified the terrorists who bombed Pan Am Flight 103 last December. London's Sunday Times says members of the anti-Arafat Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command have been pinpointed. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, the Alaska oil spill spreads as cleanup crews tread water. And later on, a look at the state of faith on an Easter Sunday, Inside Sunday. But in the battle to contain the biggest oil spill in U.S. history off the southern coast of Alaska. Alaska's environmental chief today blasted Exxon's cleanup effort and threatened to call in state and federal spill fighters. John Blackstone reports.
The Exxon Valdez still appears to be leaking oil. Booms surround the ship in an attempt to contain the fresh leaks. The main body of the spill has drifted farther south in Prince William Sound. But still, no clear decision has been made on how this 11 million gallons of oil is going to be cleaned up. State government officials said today Exxon is wasting time.
Their response was too little, too late, and they've made too many excuses. It's not an acceptable situation.
Exxon insists it's working hard to get the oil cleaned up. A helicopter carried in pieces of a command center today to an island beside the tanker, and Exxon brought in more supervisors.
The total force managing, advising, and supervising the response activities is now approaching 100 people.
But doing the dirty work on the water, there are still only a few boats, mostly belonging to local fishermen, towing booms to skim the oil, which can then be collected on barges. This is how state officials and most environmentalists would prefer to clean up the spill. Exxon says other methods are more efficient. Late yesterday, the company tested a chemical dispersant sprayed from an airplane. The dispersant is supposed to break down oil so it mixes with water, but the test brought inconclusive results. Last night, away from the cameras, Exxon also tested a method never before used on an oil spill. The oil was set on fire. Rick Flanders witnessed the test.
Flames were just roaring. 300-foot flames were shooting up. It was quite spectacular.
The primary problem with that is a potential for air pollution.
There has been at least a small measure of good luck in this spill. So far, little oil has washed ashore. This small island, Reef Island, is virtually surrounded by oil, but still its beaches remain relatively clean. On this Easter Sunday in Valdez, there were prayers that good fortune would continue. John Blackstone, CBS News, Valdez, Alaska.
Secretary of State James Baker today defended the administration's new Contra Aid partnership with Congress, but he found himself under fire from a presidential aide who is quickly becoming a Baker nemesis. Jacqueline Adams has more.
Cracks are already appearing in President Bush's first hard-won foreign policy victory. Surprisingly, it was White House counsel C. Boyden Gray who took a shot at the much-praised $40 million Contra Aid deal Secretary of State James Baker struck with Congress on Friday. Irritated because he wasn't consulted during the negotiations, Gray publicly complained that Baker had traded away the president's authority to run his own foreign policy when he gave Congress veto power over future Contra Aid. Gray's colleagues could barely disguise their own irritation.
This has no legal implications. This is a voluntary agreement on the part of the president in an attempt to reduce the kind of suspicion which has prevailed between the branches over eight or more years.
And the Secretary of State, a lawyer himself, pointedly noted Gray's absence from the inner circle.
The President, the Chief of Staff, the National Security Advisor to the President, and I all discussed this particular provision.
The new House Minority Whip tried to paper over the rift.
I think lawyers are hard to express concerns. He's acting like a good lawyer.
But some experts believe Gray is dead wrong, that the agreement enhances presidential authority by ensuring that Congress will stay out of foreign policy for 10 months.
The agreement does provide one useful thing for the Democrats, and that's cover. They were out there on a limb, trusting the Sandinistas. Now, if everything blows up in Nicaragua, they have a little bit of bipartisanship to protect them.
Privately, administration officials were baffled by Gray's decision to take on Baker. Both men are longtime trusted aides to George Bush, and some say, sadly, it is the president who's being hurt by their squabbling. Jacqueline Adams, CBS News, the White House.
It is spring again, the season of renewal, and for many, this is a day for renewing faith. Tonight on Inside Sunday, Americans and faith. Some believe faith is found not inside a building, but inside themselves. It's Easter Sunday, and millions of Americans flock to church. But for Abner Mackey, it's just another day.
If you've heard 2 or 3 sermons, you've heard enough to be a good Christian.
Mackey is what theologians call the unchurched. They believe, they consider themselves religious people, but they think the church today as an institution is quite irrelevant.
More people simply find it boring, doesn't meet their needs, isn't the most convenient means for them to make sense of life. A lot of people are taking their religious questions outside the church.
I'm thoroughly convinced that religion is practiced outwardly in everyday life, not in a church place.
Studies show that 3/4 of the American population agrees. The number of the unchurched hasn't changed much for 30 years. But here and there, individual churches are thriving, usually those that are reaching out to the community in untraditional ways.
Maestro, reprende a tus discípulos.
St. Luke's in Atlanta conducts some services in Spanish. It also has special ministries for singles, runs a soup kitchen, and offers counseling.
People come here because the church is an agency, an instrument through which they can make a difference in this city.
He is King, Sovereign, Prince.
Nancy and Steve Burnett never miss a Sunday.
Yes, of peace.
I think the church is playing an important role, and in this town, in this community, an increasing role.
I think tackling a lot of society's difficult issues takes direction and takes strength, and I think this is one place we get it.
Those who stay away insist you don't need it to tackle tough issues. Some theologians worry that the longer they stay away, the greater the peril to the church as a traditional institution.
Overall, the unchurched represent a generation of people who don't see the need to bond together, to take meanings from the past and pass them on.
That's the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather will be here tomorrow, and later on tonight, Bill Plant with the CBS Sunday Night News. I'm Susan Spencer. Good night and happy Easter.
This is CBS.